皆さん、また来てくださってありがとうございます。こちらはマンハッタンニューヨーク水曜日の午後です。ということでね、今日は、約束通り、例の、なんと Blm のハシリになったジョージ・フロイドの白人警官に殺されたというのが全くのデマで、実は、なんと、この人はフェンテノルのオーバードースで死んでいたっていうことが分かったんですね。そしてこれ2020年でしたから、実はこれをずっと隠蔽されてきていたっていうことが最近になって分かってきました。タッカー・カールソン、お願いします。どうぞ。
Now that we know that it was not in fact a pandemic of the unvaccinated, now that we know that Ukraine is not actually winning the war against Russia, it could be time to revisit some of the other slogans we've been assured are true and ordered to repeat. Are they in fact true? Did, for example, a racist white cop actually murder a man called George Floyd, a civil rights leader? We've been told that happened, told it relentlessly for more than 3 years. So at this point, we've been told it so much that pretty much everybody seems to believe it. And because everyone does kind of believe it, a small group of people has been allowed to make massive changes to American society. They include, but are not limited to, decriminalizing stealing, defunding the police, adding a new federal holiday to the calendar called Juneteenth, ceasing of hiring all white men in corporate America, and of course, significantly, they also sent a cop called Derek Chauvin to prison for more than 40 years. He would be the racist white devil who murdered George Floyd. But the question is, did he actually murder George Floyd? And the answer is, well, no, he didn't murder George Floyd. And we're not guessing about that. We know it conclusively, thanks to a new court case now underway in Hennepin County, Minnesota. The case was brought by a prosecutor there called Amy Sweezy. She's suing her boss. So the case is not actually about George Floyd or Derek Chauvin, but it tells you an awful lot about both of them. In her deposition, which you should read, Amy Sweezy describes a conversation that she had with the county medical examiner, Andrew Baker, right after George Floyd died. Quote, "I called Dr. Baker early that morning to tell him about the case and to ask him if he would perform the autopsy on Mr. Floyd." Sweezy recalls all this under oath in the deposition. Quote, "He called me later in the day on that Tuesday, and he told me that there were no medical findings that showed any injury to the vital structures of Mr. Floyd's neck. There were no medical indications of asphyxia or strangulation." Oh. In other words, George Floyd, according to the official autopsy, was not murdered. He died instead of what we used to call natural causes, which in his case would include decades of drug use, as well as the fatal concentration of fentanyl that was in his system on his final day. So this was not a killing. It was yet another narcotics OD in a country that records more than 100,000 of them every year. The medical examiner clearly understood that and, in fact, articulated it. And Sweezy explains. He said to me, she recalls in the deposition, "Amy, what happens when the actual evidence doesn't match up with the public narrative that everyone's already decided on?" And then he said, quote, "This is the kind of case that ends careers." In other words, everyone lied about it from the very beginning. The people who knew the truth hid the truth and allowed the revolution to proceed. Now they've been exposed. Now we know the truth. What happens next? Well, they're going to ignore it. The Biden administration just issued a long purple statement celebrating George Floyd's birthday. He's a martyr, despite the fact we know that he was not murdered. And by the way, Derek Chauvin is still languishing in jail for the rest of his life. So how do we respond to this? How do we respond to the truth once we have it? Well, Vince Everett Ellison seemed like a good man to ask. He's the author of Crime, Inc. So as with so many other stories, the origin
thanks for having me, Tucker.
Of COVID, it's a blessing to have you. We now know what actually happened, but the question then is, what do you do with that knowledge? We know that the U.S. government, Tony Fauci, worked with the Chinese to create the virus that overturned the American economy, but what do we do with that knowledge? What do we do with the knowledge that George Floyd was not actually strangled to death by a cop?
We have to acknowledge the people that gave it to us and why. See, George Floyd is the Democratic Party's prototypical black man. These are the black men they are trying to create. So George Floyd has to be elevated. He has to be celebrated. He's perfect to them. He was poor. He was uneducated. He was a drug addict. He didn't have a job. He was down there begging and crying and asking the white people to not kill him, to a Democrat, to a white Democrat, this is the perfect black man. So he has to be elevated. Look, not a few days ago, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden celebrated hip-hop music. They had a celebration of hip-hop.
Hip-hop culture is America's culture. It is a genre. It is music and melody and rhyme. And hip-hop is also an ethos.
A music genre that calls the black man the N-word, calls women the W word and the B word, talks about misogyny, shooting police, smoking dope, selling dope, fighting, killing, acting a fool. They celebrated this genre. Why? Because this is how they see black America. They see us the same way they see George Floyd. And they have to make more of us. In Baltimore, Maryland, they spend $21,000 per child for every child up there inside the school district. Not one school is proficient in math, science, or reading. But they keep it going every year. Why? Because they're producing George Floyds.
But
and George Floyds vote for the Democrat Party.
But why would, so when most of us, you, me, I think all normal people look at George Floyd's life, you think this is a disaster. This guy never added anything. He took a lot in prison at least 8 times. I mean, his life was a tragedy at best. Why would you want more people like that?
Because he votes for the Democrat Party. And then he teaches his children to vote for the Democrat Party. And then these white Democrats can feel superior to him. Yeah. He can be controlled by them. Just like, think about an old slave plantation, talking back in the day. How they wanted their slaves to act. Subservient, obedient, ignorant, doing what he was told. Not asking any questions. Having a slave mind. Being dependent on them. This is how they want black men to be in America. This is how they want the whole black community to be.
That's a pretty dark explanation. So you're saying that the Democratic Party as an organization intentionally degrades black people to keep them compliant and obedient.
Oh, yes. In my book, Crime Inc., I talk about the black politician, the black civil rights worker. They go into the black community. Consistently, you're a victim. You're oppressed. The country hates you. Well, see, I look at them and I say, I'm a black man, but I cannot be oppressed.
ということで、まだお話は続くんですけど、こちらが、検視報告なんですね。で、今、フェンテノルっていう、私はカタカナで書いてるんですけど、これオーバードースなんですよ。ということでね、最初から、この人は白人の警官に絞め殺されたんじゃないんですね。で、これがどうして問題かっていうと、これを発端にして BLM が始まったんですよ。そして BLM が始まって今の LGBTQ だの、エネルギー政策だの、なんだのっていう、この非常識がまかり通ってきてしまったんですね。で、それに関して、この暴動が始まって50人もアメリカでは亡くなってるんですね。プラス、この白人の警官、デレックさんはまだ刑務所にいるんですよ。で、4日前に刺されたんですね、刑務所内で。これって、ウェブスタインの時とそっくりじゃないですか。で、この証拠が出てきた、この検視結果が出てきたのっていうのは最近なんですね。なぜかっていうと、この、セクハラの裁判で出てきたことなんですよ。ミネアポリスで。ということでね、この結果が出てくると今までの全部やらせ、ヒラリー・クリントンもそうですけど、いつもやり方同じなんですよ。偽情報と隠蔽と透明性をなくして、偽情報を無知な国民に信じ込ませて、自分たちの好きなような政策をコントロールする。これね、本当にね、だからね、これからの対策というか、いち早くこの白人警官を出してあげてほしいと思うのと、どこに説明責任があるかっていうこと、この政権がどうやって責任を取ってくれるかっていうことをね、私は見守りたいと思います。そして追求してほしいと思いますということで、皆さんはどう思われましたでしょうか。また見てください。